So it's almost 12 o'clock now, so I think we'll make a start. Hello everyone, it's wonderful to have you with us today. As you know, our theme this month is Women in STEM, and throughout the month we will be releasing a variety of content centred around the women that are studying and working in the field of STEM. So that's science, technology, engineering and maths. So rather than a single person Q&A, this month I was really spoiled for choice with potential speakers, so we are running today's session a little differently. We have with us 4 incredible women who have a wealth of experience working in the often challenging world of STEM. And today they are each going to give us an insight into their personal journeys, thoughts and advice to future generations of female researchers. So my name is Jess, I'll be hosting the session. I'm a PhD student at the University of Manchester, and as a woman in STEM myself, I cannot wait to hear some other experiences. So I'll briefly fill you in on the structure of this session. For roughly the next 40 minutes, we will be hearing from each of our speakers individually, after which we will launch into our Q&A section. So this is where I ask questions submitted by our audience members. So during the talk, please do submit any follow-up questions you have via YouTube or any of our social media channels, and I'm sure our panel here will be happy to answer them. So first of all, thank you all very much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here. I'm going to stop waffling on now, and I will let you take the stage to talk to us about yourselves and your experiences. So first up, we have Nikki, who is a medical doctor training to be a medical oncologist, and she has taken time out of her clinical training to complete her PhD in cancer genomics. Hello, Nikki.
Hi. Yes, thanks for the invite to take part in this session. So a little bit of background about me. I studied medicine in Cardiff University, and my class was, I think, about 2/3 to 3/4 women, which I think is pretty standard for medical school these days. And I do remember being told at one point when we were sort of getting to the careers part that most of us at some point would end up as GPs because it's what women did, and women went to be GPs because then you could work part-time and have all your babies. And I do have to say a lot of my friends are now GPs working part-time to raise their babies. That's their choice. They're very happy doing it. So it sounded like a criticism at the time, but when you're kind of in your 30s, it does sort of make sense how people plan their careers later on. Although at the time, none of us thought we would be GPs. I did an intercalated BSc as part of my undergraduate training, and that was in physiology. So that just involved doing the 3rd year of a physiology degree at Cardiff University, and then I kind of got the BSc in that. So that started my kind of interest in research. My project, I actually managed to get out of doing any lab-based research during that, and my main kind of thesis was based on schizotypy and smell, people's sense of smell. So kind of looking to see if people had a kind of tendency towards schizophrenia and what that relationship was with how good their sense of smell was, which mainly involved me kind of wandering around Cardiff with bags of Haribo, bribing people in a very unbiased way to take part in my scratch and sniff questionnaire and personality questionnaire. Anyway, I got the BSc anyway. And then I came to Manchester to start my medical training properly. So I did my foundation years and my core medical training years all around Greater Manchester, kind of Rochdale, Oldham, North Manchester, and then Wythenshawe and Central Manchester. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do for a job. I was quite burnt out, was quite disillusioned, and I thought actually maybe I just want to go off to Australia and work there. My last rotation happened to be at the Christie Hospital, and I hadn't really thought about doing oncology before then. I thought maybe hematology was interesting, but I hadn't really thought about doing oncology for some reason. And yet while I was there, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the mix of the kind of science that you get in it and kind of how evidence-based it is, plus all the kind of touchy-feely chats. You have to be very good at talking to people, and you have to be very good at listening to people, much more importantly. And I really enjoyed how all of that worked together, plus the kind of element of palliative care and kind of quality of life emphasis that was in oncology. So I decided I was going to stay at the Christie. I did some research posts there and then applied for specialty training and got into that. Most people in medical oncology actually do PhDs. I suppose because it's a very research-driven specialty, I thought about doing a PhD and then actually decided I wasn't going to because I couldn't find one that I liked. I know I didn't want to commit myself to doing a 3 or 4 year PhD if it wasn't something that I was really interested in. Then I found a geneticist and sat in a clinic with them, and he happened to mention, oh, by the way, I have this PhD coming out tomorrow, why don't you check it out? And long story short, I did and applied for it and got it. And then started that in 2018. I also got married in 2018. In 2020, I had a baby, and that was just the beginning of lockdown, early April 2020. I was originally planning to do shared parental leave with my husband, where I would do about 7 months and he would do 5. However, as the kind of lockdown progressed, it made more sense for both of us for me to do the majority of it, and then I ended up doing all of it, which I suppose was kind of influence of how lockdown was affecting both of our jobs. The lab was shut during that time as well, so there wasn't really much point me coming back to a lab that had been turned into a COVID testing lab. Came back to work in March this year, and I've managed to get back into it with a baby, which is an interesting experience. How everything changes, and I'm sure, as certainly Sue will agree, like basically your life just becomes, everything starts a lot earlier than it used to. Is one of the main things I found. So in terms of the main kind of challenges that I've experienced or been aware of facing women, I would say one of them is the kind of obvious one around pregnancy and children. I don't think I was really fully aware of that until I got pregnant, and then until I had a baby. I think the most important kind of thing that you can have is a lot of support in whatever form that takes, whether that's a partner, other family members. You know, it's really supportive workplace, but also I guess being kind of aware that your priorities may well shift, and that's natural and normal. And it just change everything in your life. So it's just accepting that, you know, you have to rethink all the choices you've made so far and check they still fit in with your family and with your life and what you want to do. And that's different for everyone, and I'm certainly not going to speak to everyone. I'm very happy working full-time at the moment in my PhD, but I think when I go back to clinical work, for example, I'll probably do that less than full-time, because taking into account sort of shifts and weekend working, I think I'd want that extra bit of time with my family. And I always think in terms of being a woman in my job, one of the things that I heard when I went to a Women in Oncology conference a few years ago, a woman who was, in fact, I think she was the president of medical oncology at that time, said to us, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So you do have to pick what you do. So you can spend a lot of time with your family, you can spend a lot of time on your career, but there isn't enough time in the day to do everything all at once. So you do have to pick which things you do. And I think that in terms of having a family, that does still at the moment probably affect more women than men, and in terms of how you want to change your work-life balance. But again, that's a really individual thing. I think there's a lot of pressure on society, and it's important to be aware of that and how it kind of impacts you and what you feel like you should do versus what you actually want to do. And then remember that there isn't really a right or wrong answer. And the other kind of important challenge I think that faces women is, I think, a kind of subconscious influence on women to be sort of deferential, be nice, be agreeable. And I think that's a really important thing to be aware of, because it makes women less assertive if they're not aware of that. And I think that's a really hard one to fight, actually. And I've certainly been aware that in my career, I've probably been more agreeable than certainly my male colleagues. I don't think it's really held me back in certain ways, because I've still been assertive in other ways, but I'm certainly aware of colleagues who have been more prone to losing out certain opportunities, or even perhaps prone to being bullied because they came across more easy to have that done to them, if that makes sense. I think that's a really hard one to fight, and I think that's certainly one of the main things that I would focus on to advise future women. So it's about that awareness, and then there's a lot of kind of assertiveness kind of training and courses, and if you're sort of aware that that maybe is a weakness for you, that I think it's important to be aware there's resources to help you with that. And in terms of work-life balance, there is no right or wrong answer. Things will change. What you decide in your 20s will be different to what you decide in your 30s and your 40s, and that's absolutely fine. And you can always do more of something else later on. And I think it's important to, something I was listening to on a podcast the other day is think what you would want people to say about you on your eulogy, rather than think about what you want your CV to say. So that's a good way to make kind of long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions. And I think that's most of what I've got to say. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was really, really interesting. So moving on, we have Joe, who is a postdoc researching intracellular infections using live cell imaging.
So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Manchester, and my research focuses on infections caused by Listeria, which are a bacteria that causes food poisoning, but have also more serious consequences, like causing aborted pregnancies. And it's the reason why pregnant women can't eat unpasteurized cheese. And I actually use the microscope to watch the infections. So I'll actually watch every stage of the infection, from the bacteria entering the cell to them growing inside these host cells. So it's really, really fun. How did I get here? So I kind of, went to a normal secondary school, chose to do biology and chemistry at sixth form, and then did my undergraduate degree in microbiology at the University of Manchester. And it wasn't really till my third year at my undergraduate that I realised that I did enjoy the research side of things. And that's because in your third year, you do a project where you get to kind of develop your own ideas and be creative about what experiments you're doing, and you're not just given an experiment to do. You actually get to think about what you're doing and actually find things for the very first time, which is one of the things I love about science, that you're the first person to test these things and the first person to find out this novel, new, amazing thing. So after my undergrad degree, I kind of decided I wanted to do research, but I'd left it too late to apply for PhDs that year. So I did a year working as a quality control microbiologist in a pizza factory, testing whether there was any dangerous microbes on those pizzas. But I knew I wanted to go back to research, so I applied for several PhDs, and I was lucky enough to get a PhD in Liverpool, working on how skin bacteria respond to the lipids that are on your skin, and how that could affect what different bacteria actually can live on your skin, and also things like how much odor people make, for example. And then from that, I had a really supportive supervisor and decided to stay working with him for my first postdoctoral research position. And that was 3 years. And then after that, decided to move to Manchester to do the position that I'm currently doing now. And that's been another 3-year post. So that kind of brings me on to some of the challenges in the field. So one of the major challenges, as I see it, facing men and women, but possibly more women, is that there is fixed term contracts between kind of your PhD and a then permanent position if you want to stay in academia. So if you want to stay researching at a university. And that, if you want to have a family and you have to kind of really plan when you're going to get pregnant, because you're on a fixed term contract, and you will need to be paid for that time. But then also the grants aren't necessarily extended beyond the existing date. So you essentially lose out some of your time for your research potentially. So it's kind of quite it's a difficult decision of kind of balancing your career versus family life. But fixed term contracts are also just stressful for anyone, like men and women, because you have a limited period of time to do research and then to try and make something of that post and then to move on to a new position. There is kind of talks going on for how we could possibly have more permanent positions for postdoctoral researchers or longer contracts, but realistically, it's a very difficult thing to change. I would also say that the advantage of working as a woman in this kind of at university is that the research is very flexible. So you can, it's quite easy once you have a family to juggle your timing so that, you can leave early to go pick up children. You can, just make your schedule work for you, which is a good thing. I'd say beyond that, I've never actually really felt disadvantaged for being a woman in biology. I think 20 years ago or so, there was a huge male-dominated field, and you'd go to meetings and there'd only be like one other woman there or something like that. But now I've never felt like that. I've felt that there's always women in senior positions and in every aspect that I've worked in, and all the bosses I've had, even though they've all been male, none of them have treated me differently for being female. And they've been 100% supportive. And when I've said, yeah, I want a career in science, they've been like, yeah, you should go for that. Not, oh, you're a woman, So it's definitely, the field has changed, and it's not as big an issue as it used to be. Having said that, it's very important to pick your supervisors carefully, because there are still people, male and female bosses who are just not supportive for whatever reason. So, but I think that's the same in every industry. I don't think that's specific to biology or science. So my advice would just be, if you enjoy it and you think that that's what you want to do, just go for it. Similar to what Nikki was saying, I think that women do tend to be more cautious, kind of how we're raised to be more cautious compared to men. Whereas, boys are taught to be brave and to go for it. Women are kind of taught that you have to be safe and keep yourself protected in some ways. And I think that kind of sort of then influences how you kind of approach kind of progression. And you're less likely to go for kind of grants or the bigger position. But I think if it's what you're passionate about, just try and think a little bit more male, I guess, and just go for it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jo. Some really, really good points there. So thirdly, we have Sue. He started out with a maths degree, worked as an astronomer and a cosmic ray physicist, then completed a PhD in medical imaging and began a career in academia. So it sounds like you really have done it all.
Yeah, I mean, it is a long and winding road. And I think one of the things about my career is that it sort of shows you that what the choices that you make when you're 18 don't necessarily define the rest of your life. And when I was 18, I went from a small school where I wanted to be a maths teacher because my maths teacher was the person I most respected there. Went to do a maths degree, and then there was an opportunity to pick a subsidiary subject and do some modules in that, and I found astronomy, and I loved astronomy. I'd always been interested in the cosmos and space travel and things like that, and I ended up enjoying that more than learning about numerical solutions to partial differential equations and the other things I was doing in maths. So when I graduated, I found a job in the time department of the Royal Greenwich Observatory, which at the time was based in a beautiful castle in the Sussex countryside. And I actually lived in the castle. I was measuring the slowing of the Earth's rotation. And you do that by looking at stars that are directly above your head and taking photographs with a rotating plate. So my telescope was called the Photographic Zenith Tube, and it had a huge pool of mercury at the bottom of it. And one of my jobs was to go into this enclosed space and scrape the surface of the pool of mercury. And at the time, I didn't know about the risks. Nobody told me about the risks, but there you go. I only did it for a year. I found the nights quite long and lonely, and the observatory then said that, well, they'd send me to do a master's course, and I started looking. But the one that most attracted me wasn't on the list that they had. But I did find a job that that was interesting, and I left Sussex for 4 years in the cosmic ray group in Leeds University. And there I was looking after water detectors, big tanks of water, which were in huts across the Yorkshire moors. And when cosmic ray particles came into them, they let off a little flash of Cherenkov radiation, and you detect it with a photomultiplier, so you're detecting the light. And by the different times that different huts trigger, you can work out where that cosmic ray came from. So we were trying to detect really energetic cosmic ray showers. And I was there for 4 years. I felt a little bit frustrated though, because I was a research assistant, and so I didn't really have much autonomy and responsibility. So I left to do the course that I'd seen when I was in Sussex, which was a master's in computer science, and that was at UCL. And there I chose a project in medical signal processing. That kind of led on to my PhD in Manchester, where I was working on the analysis of coronary cineangiograms, so using computers to automatically detect the arterial tree in images for further analysis. And then after the PhD, I got a great postdoc job where I was asked to interview radiologists to identify areas where they'd feel that there was a benefit from automation. And so I was able to go around different specialties and see what people were doing. And I found mammography and breast screening there, and subsequently built my career in that area. I'm still working largely on breast imaging. And then about 6 years later, a lectureship came up. I was 6 months pregnant at the time when I was interviewed, and I negotiated with them a phased return to full time. So I went in 20% for the first few months. Then the idea was I'd be 50% for the rest of the year and then go up to full time. But in between, I got pregnant again, and I never actually went beyond 50%. So I worked as a half-time lecturer. I progressed from lecturer to senior lecturer, but when I tried to increase my hours, I found that it would be difficult because of financial constraints. So I stayed half-time rather longer than I wanted to. I eventually got promoted to reader, moved to 80%, because by that time I now had an elderly relative that needed care, and a member of the family with a disability. And then last year I was promoted to a professorship. So I have been around the block in terms of scientific careers. The challenges. I think my challenges are different because of my age and the atmosphere when I was younger. So the first one is unwanted attention from men in positions of power. And I'm guessing I have seen things in the newspapers where younger women have suffered from this kind of thing. But examples were a fairly senior lecturer who decided he liked the look of my watch, and in order to do so had to put his arm round me to reach for my arm. And that was between sitting exams and the marking of exams. A project supervisor who made a lot of personal comments about my appearance and then said in a suggestive way that he'd like to photograph me. And that had an impact on my ability to engage with that particular project. But I think those sorts of people are under more scrutiny nowadays. And I think, although it's very unsettling, I think younger women are probably better in a more aware position now about that sort of thing. The second one is the assumption that as a woman, I'd be the one that made the tea. And that was particularly when I was in cosmic rays, because we used to drive out to the moors with a lot of technicians, all male. I was the only woman. And they were very keen that I was the person that did all the sort of the women's jobs around the lab. They also had a lot of pornographic posters on the walls. I asked them to remove them, they refused. I made underwear for the pictures, they cut holes in it. It was a sort of game, but it was not one that I really felt happy playing. And I didn't have the confidence to complain to my head of group. I think now, from where I am, I would certainly have the confidence to do it. But I think as a young woman in a relatively junior position, it's sometimes hard to rock boats. And I think we have to be You know, I think that the right approach probably would have been to find a sympathetic member of the academic staff and talk to them about how I felt about it. But at the time, it didn't cross my mind. Third challenge, I think, was the time it took me to get promoted, working part-time. The kind of comment that you get sometimes is, well, you've not done enough since your last promotion. And I don't think the system actually takes into account that if you're employed 50%, you can't actually achieve 50% of what somebody who's employed 100% can achieve, because there's always the same amount of administration regardless. It's a kind of top slice of your time which you spend answering emails and attending meetings and things like that. And that doesn't vary depending on the percentage that you work. And the other thing is that if you want to build an international reputation and to get up the academic ladder, that's one of the things that you have to do. You have to be invited to talk abroad, and that's the way that you make the alliances that end up as big international grant applications. And if you can't travel overseas because you're the primary carer for your child, that makes it quite hard you have to say no to some of the invitations, and then people don't ask you the next time because you said no. In some ways, the COVID thing, I think, has really made life good in that front, because, you know, you can invite people from all over the world, and there is now a more open environment for international talks. And I think certainly we in the Breast Centre are very aware of the need to have women scientists presenting. I did actually go to an international meeting, and it was one of these where you have you ask your questions online and they pop up on the side of the screen behind the speakers, and you can upgrade a question. You can kind of like a question, and the most liked ones bubble up to the top, and then the chair asks the most liked questions. And at this particular meeting, the most liked question was, why are there not any women speakers in this session? And it was, I think it was embarrassing for the organisers, but it was a good point, well made. So advice. I think sticking with it and having the confidence to challenge unacceptable behaviour or practices is really important. And I think it also helps if you can find a senior ally or mentor who you can use as a sounding board, or if need be as an advocate. I think making sure that your voice is heard, and that's not always easy. I've been at meetings relatively recently where I've said something and it's kind of just got lost in the babble of a meeting, and then a male colleague has said the same thing louder, and it's been focused on as the idea, and it's a little bit galling, and I think it's partly my own behaviour in meetings that I need to work towards changing. Yeah, and I think the other thing is a little bit like Nikki said about being able to be picky and say no. For a while when I was working 50%, I had a whole 100% worth of teaching load because I couldn't say no to any teaching. I just kind of enjoy teaching, and people would say, will you teach this module? And I said, yeah, I'll do that. And I ended up with actually the highest teaching load in my whole department for a while, just because I couldn't say no. So I think being a little bit more choosy about what you say yes to is really important. But yeah, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed my life scientific, as they call it on the radio, and I'm sure that there are lots of different opportunities for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so
We
much.
might have lost Jeff. Oh no, Jess is back. Ignore me.
Incredible.
No, I think we have lost Jess.
Okay.
Devin, do you wanna go ahead and tell us a little about yourself and the challenges you faced, and then we can jump to questions after that.
Sure. So I'm a PhD student, and I work in circadian rhythms and how inflammation is affected by circadian rhythms. So I'm much earlier in my career, but a bit about my journey so far. So I really wasn't certain that I'd want to be a scientist until kind of A-level, where I had a really inspiring teacher, and then carried on into university. And as has been highlighted so far, it wasn't really until I got stuck into kind of project-based research where I could ask my own questions and have some say over what it was I was actually researching, where I really became engaged. I was able to do a year in industry, and I did it in Australia, which was really amazing to do at that university level. So I moved over to Melbourne and I did a year looking at type 1 diabetes. And one of this was not my main project, but one of the side kind of parts of that experience was I was actually able to help with eyelid transplants. So we had donor pancreases. We would then digest away the kind of extracellular matrix and then package islets for patients. And during that time, I realized that while diabetes was really interesting in a scientific way, it was quite a saturated field, and actually to make real inroads I thought would be quite challenging. So I went back to university and finished, and then did an integrated master's. So as part of my actual undergraduate degree, I had an extra year where I was able to do a master's, which was more microbiology focused. And that was really interesting, but I didn't feel like it had the same kind of real life implication or patient aspect as the diabetes side did. So then I applied for a PhD in circadian rhythms, which is really the novelty aspect that I found exciting, the microbiology stuff, but also the patient and real life implication. I can talk to my granny about it and she understands vaguely what I'm talking about, which is really important for me. I'd say that the key challenges I've faced so far have been more to do with imposter syndrome. At university, a friend and I actually started a society for women in science because we felt we just had no idea. We knew broadly that women were disadvantaged in some way and that they didn't seem to make it to the top as often as men did, but we really didn't know why. And so having those debates amongst ourselves actually was the first time where I really started to learn why these kind of trends are happening and if there is anything we can do about it. So at that time, we were really keen on working on interview skills or negotiation skills or things that we could do to actually make our experience better for ourselves. And I learned a lot of interesting things there, which kind of tallied with some of the experiences I'd had. So moving forward, I had my current PhD supervisor is really, really supportive. She's a woman in science and she's so supportive, and our group is actually largely female. And I'd say that the reason why I'm really, really enjoying this PhD is because the management and our working relationship as a group is really, really good. We are constantly in dialogue with each other, which is really important for circadian work because we work very odd hours. So it's really important for each other to kind of pick up odd bits here and there and kind of help out with each other's experiments. And I think that that's fostered really positively within this group. Some of my previous experiences, I felt really unsupported, or that the management from the PI was not kind of helping us to work collaboratively. So I'd say that's really positive. But imposter syndrome still exists. If there's a job, for example, and there's kind of 10 criteria, there was a study a while back that said, even if men hit, say, 6 or 7 of those criteria, they will apply, where on average, women wait until they have hit all 10 of those criteria points before they apply. And so that's something that I constantly have to work on. But for me, I'd say particularly early in my career, just accepting that that's something they'll have to keep coming back to at every new stage. So yeah, overall, I'd say that's my biggest issue. And advice for future generations, I'd say absolutely, as has been highlighted before, management is key. I have a lot of friends who I think if they had been given better support and had better management from their PI, they probably still would be in science today. But when you're very young and you're only kind of starting to establish yourself and you have a really negative experience, that can completely put you off. And I understand why they did leave, but I don't think it has anything to do with their ability. And that for me is really one of the things that needs to change. And I think, yeah, going forwards, anyone who wanted to do anything in science, wanted to work for a university for a PI, I'd say have a real lengthy conversation with this person about how do you deal with negative data, for example, what happens if there's some kind of conflict within the lab, because those are the things that take it from being, I like my job, but to this is awesome and I really, really enjoy doing this. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. I am not sure if I'm stable or not.
Thank you.
Maybe I should jump in and cover the questions. So we've had a few that have come in. So the first one is from Katie, who's asking, what do you guys think about paternity leave? Do you think increasing the availability for paternity or partner leave would provide more relief for the kind of pressures that women face after they've had children and are kind of working with their maternity leave?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's not just like the paternity leave, which often is just that kind of 2 weeks initially after the baby is born, but it's actually about shared parental leave, I think. And I think a lot of people don't actually know that it's available. So just to give you our example, my partner works for a car company. He didn't know until I told him that that was a thing. And his company were fine with it. And there's other male colleagues of his who have done it, but people just don't know about it as much, I think. So I think part of it is more men applying for it as a kind of knowledge of how it works. And also, I mean, ideally, like the sort of Scandi model where kind of both partners are almost expected to take that first 6 months off, say, would be ideal, because that would really just get rid of that whole idea that women are always going to be that bit behind. But how workable that is, that's a massive kind of cultural change, and that's obviously not going to happen overnight or anytime soon. But I think certainly an awareness that men can do that, and more expectation of men doing those kind of tasks is good. The only difficulty that practically is with breastfeeding, because if you're breastfeeding overnight, then there's, to be honest, not really much the man can do. So in terms of practical terms, unless you're kind of pumping and then putting it in bottles and the man's going to get and prepare that, it's actually difficult to do that. So you have to kind of have a discussion in your family about how you want to do the day and night, because especially when an infant, it really is a 24/7 job. So certainly they can do the day and you can do the night, for example, but you have to sort of think practically about that, and also be aware that your job has a legal right to be a bit flexible with you for both parties as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts, but actually another question kind of, I think, ties in really nicely with what you just said, Nikki. So the question is, do you think the added flexibility of academic working adds pressure to your relationships, as it's kind of assumed that you're the one that's going to be doing the childcare, taking on the family commitments, and because you're in academia, you have a kind of flexibility to do that? I mean, I guess that's more of a like case-by-case basis, but have you kind of had any experience, anyone, with like issues such as this?
I mean, so I don't have children, so not for childcare, but we have a house that we're renovating at the moment, so there's a lot of builders needing access to the house, and one of us needs to be off, so it's sort of relatable. But I think it's just about kind of having a conversation, having your own kind of boundaries. So I say, I can be home if I've got 2 weeks notice and I haven't planned a really important experiment, because I need that amount of time to book my equipment to use the lab. So if I've booked up the lab and a builder says, oh, I can come tomorrow, I'm like, well, you're going to have to, to my partner, I'm like, you're going to have to be the one to stay home because I can't. So I think it's just about having your own boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jo. I think also it's about having an ongoing dialogue with your partner about how things are. I think it's having a baby, especially those first year, really is really stressful in a relationship. Every couple I know that have had a baby have found it difficult, and there's always, every single couple, been that issue of the mum kind of feeling like, am I expected to do more than the man? And there's the kind of subconscious almost expectation, but also then in practical terms, especially if the man is working, about how that can actually work. And that is really individual for each couple. But I think it's a really personal kind of decision and discussion. And it's really important that you just keep having those chats and keep, as you say, laying down your own personal boundaries and making sure you've got time to do everything that you need to do as well. But it's really difficult. It's difficult. I mean, it takes a village. I mean, to be honest, it really it takes more than two people in my experience to be able to do it realistically. And COVID has obviously made that a lot more difficult. But it's a challenge, whatever the scenario.
And I think, I mean, it doesn't get easier once paternity leaves. It's usually thought about as being immediately after you have the baby, but in fact, the time that I found that was actually hardest was when my children were maybe 3 or 4, and the summer holidays, that it's okay, they go to sort of perhaps when they're at nursery school, they'll go to a nursery school in term time, or maybe even 5, but then in the summer holidays they're too young to do any summer holiday clubs, and they don't particularly want to go back to a nursery because they've grown up from that, and that age, there's an age when it's quite hard finding childcare. I know people working in academia who've had contracts. They've had part-time contracts that have basically been school term time, and I think that is a good example of how flexible working can really help. But we made a lot of use of all the. I mean, my poor children had to do all sorts of sports in the summer holidays, and music and anything that I could find, science, everything. Because it was the only way that I could maintain my working life.
Brilliant. So what sort of, well, rather, I mean, a lot of the things that you guys talked about as being sort of one of the helpful things was like positive peoples in kind of positions above you and colleagues and stuff. Could you kind of discuss a bit more about the sort of qualities in like a workplace or amongst your colleagues that you kind of really value and kind of help help kind of give you the confidence to approach the problems that you've been having?
I think there are some formal mentorship schemes which are really worth tapping into. When I was a senior lecturer, there was a scheme called Women into Leadership, and it was an absolutely inspirational member of staff ran it, and things that she told me that I've remembered and kept to, that she said, men apply for promotion, and if they don't get it, they apply at the next round, and they keep on applying until they get it, and their name is there, and everybody says, oh, that's so-and-so. Whereas women apply for it, don't get it, and then they go and lick their wounds in a corner for a few years, and before they'll actually try applying again, or they want to be absolutely certain that they meet all the criteria, whereas it's just a kind of cultural difference. So people that will tell you that sort of stuff, somebody that will go through your CV with you, I think is really useful, because academic CVs are a very particular thing, and how you actually portray yourself is vital. People that will help you network, so people that will get you onto a grant as a junior colleague, or get you onto a paper, and a team of people, so that you then meet other people. I think that sort of access to networking is a really important thing.
Yeah, I think so for me, the kind of position I'm in now, kind of going towards a kind of more senior role, it's important for me to get some of my own independence as well in terms of research, as well as doing the job. So having that conversation with my supervisors, like during the interview process, like what scope is there for independence, and the fact that they were really supportive of that and said, yeah, there's extra funding. Actually, there's this funding for training that you can use for whatever you want. And then, you know, they've been true to that throughout the job, and just, yeah, and even they'll point me in the direction of things that they think will be good for my career as well. And even though it takes time away from the research, I think you can get supervisors who all they want a postdoc to do is the research. And those are the ones you have to be careful of, because they don't want you to do well in terms of your own career. They just want you to get the papers out. And you need to develop yourself as well as the research. So yeah, it's about them understanding that and yeah, actually supporting you and having those kind of conversations about careers.
Another important thing in terms of mentors and kind of role models is it doesn't have to just be one. So you can have different role models or mentors for different aspects of your career. So don't kind of think, oh, I haven't got a mentor because it's not one person who is exactly who I want to be in sort of, 15, 20 years time. You can have somebody who is really useful at kind of helping you at the current stage of your career. You can have someone else who you really aspire to, you think, I want to be like them in, X number of years. You can also have someone else who you think has really got their head screwed on about how they're managing family and work, or just that kind of balance. And it's important to try and touch base with all of those aspects and get support in those different areas. Don't think it's just got to be one person who's completely got it made in every area.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's really good. So this is also something that I think a couple of you have touched on as you discuss your own experiences, but how much do you guys feel that the sort of early decisions you make kind of pigeonhole you later in life? So you did loads of different things, but do you guys kind of have like almost like a sort of priority system or something to kind of make these decisions? Or, how have you kind of made these decisions yourselves in the past?
I've always made decisions that have left me the most options. So I applied to medical school because I thought, even if I don't want to do medicine, I can't do medicine if I haven't got a medical degree, whereas if I have got a medical degree, I can still do lots of other stuff as well. And then I've kind of gone a bit more like that. So I've kind of gone a combination of that, and then also just kind of following your gut and seeing where you feel the most at home and where you spend time with the people that you most want to spend time with. That's the kind of main sort of way, I suppose, that I've made career decisions. But I definitely think it's important to not be afraid of not making a decision in case it's the wrong one, because you can always change your mind. I think sometimes the most dangerous thing is to not make any decision at all and just to stay put where you are. Once you're moving, you can always change direction, but if you never get going, you can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think most of my decisions, it was just a mixture of luck and circumstance. I don't really think that I actually had a plan. And there were things that sometimes I would try something and it didn't quite work. I actually applied to be an astronaut at one point, and that didn't come off. I didn't do very well on the health screening on it because I have allergies and they wouldn't take anybody with an allergy, and they should have said that at the beginning. But I did pass the language test. Yeah, I think it's just a case of looking for things that you find interesting, because if you're interested in what you do, then that's great, and that will make you do well. I think you have to follow your passions in a lot of ways. And universities, if you get to work in a university, I think we're in one of the best places in the world for having that kind of flexibility to learn while you're on the job, because there are always courses that you can do and there are always new skills that you can pick up. And I think that lifelong learning is really important about a career in STEM.
Brilliant. So there's one last question that I've been sent, which is do you feel women have any advantages over men in STEM careers? Does anyone got any thoughts on that?
I think you can do. I think so. There have been times where people have told me, oh, that guy is more willing to help their students if they're a young, attractive woman. And even though they're not, coming on to those students, it's still a kind of, you can use it sometimes. I wouldn't say I often do, but just because it makes me feel a bit gross, but it can be. And also, I think sometimes people don't expect as much of you in some ways as a woman, so you can surprise people, and that is a benefit.
Two sort of benefits, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay, well, unless anyone has any more thoughts on that, that's all the questions we've received. So thanks everyone for coming and having a chat. It's a shame we lost Jess halfway through, but I really enjoyed it, and I think, I hope everyone found it quite valuable, everyone who watches it. So I think that's that. Does anyone have any sort of like closing comments they'd like to make? Or should we wrap things up? I'm just going to wrap things up. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in, those who watch live.